Awesome. Hey, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 27th, 2024. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF sponsored meeting, so let's follow their guidelines, which basically boil down to be nice to each other, keep your language appropriate, and yeah, let's try and have a good meeting today. I do this normally. I see maybe one or two new people here. I'll open the floor really quickly just for maybe like a quick intro, who you are, why you're here, why you're interested, if you want to. Otherwise, no pressure if not. So I'll leave that open for a second. Okay, well, we'll get rolling then. Sweet. So today we have a couple of things on the agenda. I posted the agenda document in our chat for everyone to see. And yeah, first things first is from Surya regarding the inline CIDR PR API change. Let's see, pulling that up. I'll share my screen. Surya, do you want to talk to this just for a second?
Yeah, I think I'm basically just looking for reviews on this one. This one is kind of ready to go. We had a few issues around trying to get the API ironed out, like the syntactically speaking, because we have the new cell validation expressions, which technically will make CIDR validation much, much, much simpler. However, the new cell stuff is slated to release only as part of 1.31 kube release. So until 1.31, we will have to do something else, which is support the old pattern validation regex matching, which is what I'm doing here. But as part of that, when we do move to the cell validation, right, I want us to be backwards compatible. So I want to make sure that we do set a max length for our CIDR block, which is the inline CIDR PR that we're adding for admin network policy API in this PR. And according to Linux, it's 48. And then if I add the /128 to it, it brings it to 52. But I don't know if I should be strict and make it 52 or if I should give it an upper bound of 55. What's the thing here? Like, I'm looking for some reviews, basically.
That's a really good question. So right now you have it as 60. Linux puts it at 48. I'd have to go do some back
48
research.
for the address. Yeah, 48 for the address, but I think for a CIDR, if I add the 4 characters for the /128, it might go up to 52. But I also don't want us to be too strict to the point where I might be missing some corner cases of IPv6.
But for Compat, we can go up a little easier than we can go down, right? Like we can expand it if we have to, but constraining it tighter is trickier, right? Because you're going to break users. So I would, like, without having looked, I would go for what Linux says, and then if we have to bump it, we can. But I'll leave an actual comment there once I read about it a little more.
Yeah, that sounds like a good advice. So yeah, I'll just put it up here for reviews, and mostly I also need you, Yang, Dan to take a look at it because I would love to get this PR merged as soon as possible. Did I lose everyone?
Looks like Andrew dropped.
Yep. But I think Surya is the host now. At least what the message said.
It did? It randomly picked me?
I don't know, I think I saw that.
That's what I saw too.
Oh, cool.
Oh, Andrew's back. Cool.
Sorry, looks like I got booted out of the meetings. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, I'm back. My network went crazy for a second. Yeah, so looking for reviews on that one. I'll put it on my list, Surya. Thanks for the poke. It was on my list. I just didn't get to it. The next one from Surya is 196. Let's see. Removing same, not same labels for folks who are a little bit newer to the group. Not same labels was an API design decision we made at the beginning to allow users to easily build tenants. And in the meantime, Nadia has been spearheading a separate NPEP for tenancy, which makes this a lot better. This original API was kind of gross. So Surya has opened his PR just to rip out that original mechanism now that the tenancy NPEP has been moving along. I think it's all right that if we merge this before Nadia's work is done, just because I don't think any implementation is actually implemented same or not same labels. Is there anyone else that disagrees? I'm gonna take that lazy consensus as a no.
Yeah, the only
so-
I looked at this and was thinking, especially the part where we're removing old types, and I was like, oh, are we definitely getting rid of this, or is it possible that the tenancy API is gonna resolve in a way that we still need? I forget, it was like the namespace peer type or something like that. So, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess
totally.
having this ready to go is probably good, but maybe don't merge it yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'm totally all right with that. Is this blocking you all downstream in any way, Surya? Or is that all right if we hold it?
I think we can hold it for now. It's just good to iron out the internal types changes that I need to do downstream for the implementation.
I think once Nadia has moved to the point where we have a PR open for the actual API changes for tenancy, then we can think more closely about removing it, because we don't quite know yet if we're gonna need any of those types. I think that's what Dan's saying. So, and we're almost there. So it would only be like a couple weeks.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough and a good point.
Yeah, I'll try to push that somewhat sooner than also. But I think that's what we're gonna end up with anyway. I don't think we'll need this namespace peer, so.
Sweet. Well, thanks for opening that, Surya. That's awesome. Appreciate the help. Okay, and Surya, one more from you in regards to policies and services. Can you just contextualize the problem for everyone here?
Yeah, I think so. In the network policy docs, specifically related to services, right? Like, so how the policy blocks traffic to the backends or endpoints of a specific service. This is what I just quoted it off the docs, right? It literally says that the behavior might be different for different combinations of network plugins, cloud provider service implementation. So these mechanisms are kind of not defined. So it is not defined, right? Whether the policy happens before or after in cases where we rewrite the source or destination IPs of packets. And I think that's fair enough, right? We can't really say what implementations and how implementations implement the API. Just want to make sure that we want to do something very similar here for ANP and BANP. So I guess what I'm trying to say that is in OpenShift downstream, we're trying to kind of implement this, right? Like, so we're in the final stages of getting all the pieces ironed out. Should we be looking at doing a documentation to our website, very similar to what we have in network policies, which says what you do not do, or be careful, or the undefined stuff, right? Which is not clear, or implementation defined stuff, like have sections which talk about the corner cases here, which clarify and call out some things. I don't know if it's worth doing it or.
Go ahead, Nadia.
Yeah, I think this part about services, it makes sense that we don't have the defined behavior for service IPs, how they behave, right? If they are blocked by IP blocks or something else. But I would say we should definitely make network policy work for pod-to-pod communication, even if it's routed through a service, right? Otherwise, you can work around any policy with the service. So if you create a service and ping it, and the network policies do not apply to that anymore, it doesn't make any sense to have network policies at all, maybe.
Dan?
So sorry, I missed a little bit of the beginning. Are you actually asking about network policy here or admin network policy?
My question was about admin network policy. If we should do exactly what network policy does
No.
today. Or...
No. We should get rid of as much undefined behavior as we possibly can. And this is one of the reasons why we aren't even dealing with the cluster ingress use case yet, because we have no idea how to get rid of the unspecified behavior in that case. Part of the reason why this is undefined in network policy is because we just didn't think of it at the time, and then people had gone off and implemented it in different ways. So, you know, if we can prevent that from happening in ANP, that's what we want to do.
So is the main hole today going to be with like an IP block now that we're implementing egress? Like if a user specifies a cluster IP of a service in an IP block, what happens? Like we need to explicitly specify what happens in that case. And then isn't that the main one? Is that the main hole?
So
It's also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
well, I was going to say, with some things, depending on the network plugin, like if you have a service that points to a cluster external IP that you should be blocked from getting, it's possible that using the service IP would let you get there. And even if using a cluster IP wouldn't, it's possible that using a load balancer IP might let you. And fixing that is actually kind of ugly, but we should at least think about it.
Okay, yeah, that's the inverse case then. So if pod A can't talk to pod B normally directly, but then pod A reaches out to a service that's backed by pod B, that works. That's a big hole, right?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, for pod to pod traffic with cluster IPs, like that is already guaranteed to work just with network policy. The big one is pod to external IP or you know, cluster external IP traffic, where since it's not well defined exactly how network policy and services work there, like in some cases, the answer is it doesn't work. Nadia, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, how is it defined? So what happens if I specify service IP in a CIDR, in an IP block?
I think network policy does not actually say anything about that, but I think the assumption would be that you just can't do that, that such a policy doesn't mean anything.
Oh.
Because like, for instance, because normally network policy takes effect after the service IPs have been rewritten into pod IPs, right?
Yeah. Well,
so
the best part would be to just apply, I guess, to work in both cases, but then we need to add like that clarification, right, to the new egress IP block, saying that service IP actually doesn't mean anything.
I know that for the PR that I have for the CIDRs for A and P, we specifically call out that the cluster internal traffic will be checked against the rule. So if you specify a 0.0.0.0, that is going to deny everything. So I know that we meant pod CIDRs, but it also includes the service ones.
Yeah, so to make it perfectly consistent, it would be nice to actually check for services both before for like IP block and then after for resolved pod IPs.
Is there a maybe we need to spec it out more, but is there a use case that's like super valuable for allowing selecting service CIDRs or service IPs with the CIDR block? Like I understand the consistency argument, but if we just write down that, you know, you can't do this, you can't select services, then we are being consistent. And if it makes it easier to implement, then I mean, you know, unless there's a good use case for it, maybe we should pick the one that's easier to implement.
So the argument is that, you know, what I was saying, that usually the idea is that service rewriting happens first and then network policy gets applied, because that matches what we see with pod to pod connections. So given that idea, putting a rule that matches service IPs should have no effect, because network policy never acts on packets that have service IPs in them.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm just looking for a counterpoint user story if there exists one.
I mean, certainly, I'm sure somebody could say, "Oh, I want to block these users from connecting to this specific service," right? But I think we would just want to say that you should block the endpoints in that case.
So does it mean we need to update our egress CIDR docs at least?
Yeah, the PR is still up for review. So Andrew, if you open the PR up, the first link that we had on the agenda, 185, I think. Yeah. Maybe this is where I probably need to, if you open the change log. So this is what we say, right? So maybe we need to be very explicit here, like you said, which is the fact that, you know, trying to even include services or service CIDRs here makes no sense because it's going to get applied afterwards, right? But again, that's an implementation detail. I don't know if that's well defined. Maybe we make it well defined.
I mean, for now, I wouldn't be against just saying like, don't do it. Kind of like Raul said. Like, I know that it wouldn't matter. Like, it won't work generally for most implementations. But if we write in the API for now, like explicitly, don't do it, that's being constrained, which I'm all right with. I think that will be reevaluated if we ever come back and actually figure out all the rabbit holes that is a service selector, which I know plenty of people are going to want and have been asking for forever and ever. But for now, I would be explicit and say don't do it if it was me, unless anyone strongly objects. Nadia?
Yeah, I think just one more thing to that, maybe we could update the npap itself also with some kind of a comment so that it's easy to track why we decided to do that.
+1, and then Nathan, you're up.
Yeah. Did I hear you right, Dan, that you say you want to remove the ambiguity in ANPs relative to network policy? And if so, how can that be accomplished? Are there implementations where IPs are explicitly not used to select internal traffic?
What do you
Or
mean?
not allowed? Cilium, for example, does not allow users to select internal traffic with IP addresses. You cannot use CIDR blocks.
It doesn't do that with network policy because we never defined the correct behavior in network policy, and so it's undefined. With admin network policy, there is one correct behavior, and it is that you will check IP blocks.
It seems odd that the baseline network policy and then a sort of higher level construct built on top of it wouldn't have the same definition or the same semantic structure.
Yes, but the longer term plan, I hope, is to deprecate old network policy in favor of a new developer network policy that has semantics more similar to admin network policy. Basically, network policy is broken in all sorts of weird ways, and we can't fix it because like we can't break the API. And so as we add new stuff, we want to add it in ways that are not broken in the same way that the old APIs are. So yes, that means that some things about admin network policy will not work exactly the same as regular network policy. I mean, in particular, the fact that it doesn't have the implicit isolation is another big one.
Right. Thanks.
+1, yeah. I don't love the argument of like keeping things consistent between network policy and what the new APIs are putting out as part of the network policy API effort. Like one of the original things was like, we don't like network policy in a lot for all these reasons, XYZ. Like, let's move forward away from it. So I want to make sure we keep doing that, right?
So is the proposal then in this case, don't use CIDRs to refer to services and or specific internal traffic? Is the proposal to ban certain forms of internal traffic from being addressed by CIDRs?
I think what we were talking about today is specifically about service IPs, only service IPs. Because deny to 0.0.0.0/0 means deny to everything. That includes pod IPs, external IPs, etc. Like anything, right? For me, the service IP case is really murky.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm not against also saying like, it's not a great idea to, like, why would anyone in their right mind write a pod IP in a CIDR block? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Like you would always use a label, right? But it might happen.
So
sorry.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that Cilium actually takes, so that there is Cilium's implementation ignores CIDR blocks completely for internal traffic. And so one of the reasons changing that is something that's been difficult with Cilium. So the fact that we're now going to explicitly define IP behavior in the network policies is going to, I think, take some time to implement in the Cilium project, but that's not necessarily a good reason for changing the API. But
so in Cilium today, if a user writes a rule that says deny to 0.0.0.0, it means
it only refers to
allowed.
Yeah, okay. It only refers to external traffic. There's a very hard boundary between those two things in Cilium. It's breaking down slightly. There is a flag you can turn on to address services by IP, but you still can't address pods by IP.
I gotcha. Okay, Rahul has had his hand up, so I'll let him go.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Whatever way we decide, we should clarify which service IPs we mean, like not just cluster IP, but also the external IP that gets written by load balancers. I guess write down which ones we mean when we say service IP.
Yep, makes sense. I agree. Dan?
So on on the thing about whether IP blocks apply to pod traffic or not, we had a discussion about this. I actually prefer the idea that IP blocks don't refer to pod traffic and that they only refer to traffic leaving the cluster. But other people felt that it was better to have a model where essentially all network policy enforcement happens at the same place in the traffic flow, rather than some policies being enforced like more tightly in the cluster and other policies being enforced on the outside of the cluster, essentially. And so we agreed on the behavior where all the rules are enforced in the same place, which by default ends up meaning that IP block rules apply to pod traffic as well as non-pod traffic. And we knew that Cilium did it the other way around, but again, we feel that whichever rule we decided on, we want all implementations to use the same rule rather than having it be implementation defined like it currently is with network policy. So Cilium ended up being the loser on that decision.
Nadia?
There was another point to that, right? That we couldn't properly define what internal versus external traffic means. I don't think we have an answer yet.
There are vague cases like whether nodes are internal, node IPs should count as internal or external, but there are plugins for which it is not easy to distinguish internal from external traffic, but the API already requires you to be able to do that, right? Because you can say select from all namespaces, and that means every single pod IP and nothing else. So you already have to be able to do that for some policies. So we could say that IP blocks don't affect pod-to-pod traffic. And that would be difficult to implement for a different set of implementations.
Anyone else? Questions, comments here?
So I think just to sum that discussion up and to get moving with this specific PR here, I guess, is everybody okay if I explicitly call out the fact of not using service VIPs here and that it doesn't make sense? Well, make sense as in I'll put more details on based on what we spoke today, and also update the NPEP and call it out boldly that for ANP and BANP, the service VIPs, which includes cluster IPs, external IPs, and load balancer ingress VIPs, I guess, right? Putting that in the CIDR block is a don't do it, and wait for maybe, or open a new use case or whatever, right? For a service select or whatever that might be, if they do want to do something like that.
+1 for me. Cool. Sweet. Thank you, sir. And yeah, Nathan, I totally understand that this would be a harder thing to change in Cilium. So it'll be interesting to see. And everyone, we went through kind of a long discussion about what 0.0.0/0 means. Like it spanned like a month.
I don't expect you all to rehash the argument. That's fine.
No, totally.
We currently have options in which IPs can be expressed onto different entities internal to the traffic, and I'm sure we'll be able to add pods to the mix.
Yeah, it'd be great in a world where it'd be great if there was a world where, like what Cilium does, like identity wasn't tied to an IP for a pod, but like so many people today have done it like that, and I don't agree. Like identity in Kubernetes is more coupled to like a label than a pod, which is what I think, and that should be pushed all the way down to the network, and it's just not the case for like most implementations, unfortunately. But anyway, okay, we'll move on. Thank you, Surya. Good work. Bunch of good notes there. Next one, Rahul has opened up his FQDN selector API change PR. Excited to see that. I would love for folks to get a look at it. I gave it a quick review this morning and I'll keep looking at it. Is there anything else you want to add, Rahul?
The main thing is, I think the corollary to this IP block discussion, or like the parallel to it, is going to happen for FQDN as well. Can you select pods? Can you select services using DNS names? Yeah, we need to have that discussion. For now, I wrote it as it's not expected to work, but you know, I guess that still leaves the door open for implementations to have it work. But like, yeah, based on our discussion, we probably want to tighten that wording up and pick one way and write it down.
Hopefully,
Nadia?
yeah. Although
Oh.
might or might not work is a little bit better than might work in one of two different ways. But yeah, like not having the ambiguity at all would be better.
I just wanted to ask if we actually agreed in the end. I can't remember that this whole DNS resolution is just a mapping from a DNS name to a set of IPs. And then if that's what we went on with, we could just say that the rules are the same as the ones for IP block.
I mean, practically it is, but I don't know how to define that in like we can make the same restrictions, right? We can say you can't select service IPs, or you can't put a star.cluster.services or whatever and expect it to allow traffic to the service. So we can write that down, and so that's like the equal parallel. Does that kind of answer what you were thinking?
Yeah, I'm mostly even thinking about some kind of referencing to the same behavior, right? So let's say we change it at some point, it probably would be nice to work the same way for both DNS names and IP blocks at the same time.
That feels tricky to like define a spec and like spec guidelines in a way that references that, because I don't know, at that point it feels very prescriptive about how you must implement it, in a way that maybe it's possible, but I wonder if that's more complicated than it needs to be. Not sure if people have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be tightly coupled to the outcome of egress, in my personal opinion. But let's hash it out on the PR. I think that's like the best place to make sure we keep track of the discussion. Anything else for Rahul? Questions, comments? Okay, cool. Thanks, Rahul. Get some reviews on that ASAP. That's awesome. Okay, last thing on the agenda I threw on here, coming off of our discussion last week in regards to tenancy, we really want to push this forward. Nadia's kind of worked with Dan and put together a final kind of suggestion, which we think is the best way forward, and I am aligned with. So we'd like to move forward with this. Nadia, do you want to run over maybe what you'd like to move forward with, kind of how it came out of last week's discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I updated the last meeting's agenda with some more pros and cons for every solution. We discussed that a bit more. So hopefully it's more obvious now which way we wanted to go forward with. So you can check, Andrew, if you could open the last meeting's agenda. So we ended up outlining some more pros for a separate object with implicit priorities. So because first of all, it's limited to the use cases we designed it for, so it's more difficult for users to do something unexpected. The other improvement, more or less, that changes to the existing objects are not needed except for what Sura is doing, which is like a simplification, not an actually adding extra fields and priorities and some either or switches. And then another point was that if this API just doesn't work, we can throw it away and implement something differently. So, and then there were some more cons added to the first option, which is we also figured out there is no way to define a separate BNP because BNP is a singleton. So if we add tenancy to BNP, there will be no way to define a separate BNP, like to just deny all or for whatever default policy you want to have if you also need some tenancy at that level. So just summarizing that up, it's also outlined in the NPAP itself, but hopefully it is convincing that we should go with the second option here. And then what Andrew has linked about the final solution is just a variation of how the API may look like with this new object. There are some ways of how we can tweak it, but it's pretty simple. And then just please let me know if, well, first of all, if you think there are more points to the decision taken that we should take into consideration about like the single object versus reusing NBNP with this priority. And then second point is to check how this new object looks like. It's not set in stone yet. So we can tweak field names, any minor changes. And then also for now, it focuses on just using same tenant, as I've said before, because it actually simplifies the options we need, because you can define just same tenant policy with this object, and then not same tenant is literally can be defined by ANP or BNP, and sometimes even joined with a bigger policy. Let's say if you want to deny not just not same tenant, but like everything, then you can also put that in the best baseline network policy, and then you don't need two separate policies for not same tenant and just external traffic or everything else, or something that is not affected by tenancy. So it's like kind of potential improvement also. So yeah, just I guess take a look at this final proposal, how it's called, I don't remember, section, final suggestion section.
Thanks, Nadia. Any questions, comments right now for Nadia before folks go read it? Great. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Moving on. I think that's the last thing on the agenda. Yep. That's the last thing on the agenda for today. Is there any other things folks would like to discuss? One thing I'll bring up of note is we do have a maintainers track session at KubeCon North America, and we're definitely trying to highlight work that everyone here has done. So Surya, me and Hunter kind of working on that together. If there's stuff you would like highlighted that you've been working on, please reach out. It can be anything. It can be small, big. We want to highlight you, right? Like this is your session. It's all of our sessions. So it's not just a 1 or 2 person thing. So reach out if you have any suggestions, ideas, what we should be presenting. The rough outline right now is to focus on the new NPEPs, the features that are getting merged, and as well as the network policy assistant tooling that Hunter's been working on. So if there's anything else there, let us know. Okay, with that, if there's nothing else, going once, going twice, sold, I can give everyone 15 minutes back, which is awesome. And you can use the time to, of course, I know, go review NPEPs because that's everyone's favorite thing. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming out. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Hope you all have a good one. See you later.
Bye.